You're live. It said it told me you're live, so as long as YouTube is accurate, then we're all good. Okay, so welcome back to our session 2 of day 3. And so what we're doing today is working with the notion of pervasions, the notion of logical connections between things. Okay, so that's the general topic for today. It is a little different than what was in the schedule because we had intended to start covering it yesterday, but it really takes some time to go through everything, and we knew the schedule would be flexible, so I hope you're all fine with that. And now we're going through pervasions, and the way we do that is, the way you get familiar with having a sense for how to understand, how to think about when there is a pervasion or not is by working through the joints, the possibilities between two different phenomena. Okay, so that's where we are. And we had a question that was posed yesterday, and we wanted to go back to that question and just address it because it really has to do with how our colloquial language and the debate language sometimes you need to spend a few moments to try and translate. So we have to spend some time to take a step back and reflect on what we're really trying to say when we have a question or make a statement in our colloquial English or whichever native language you have. It's probably not that different. So let me just double check everything is going. Stream is good. And then I'll check what the question was here because I don't have it in memory. So the question, how to deal with a situation about the thesis. Okay, so right, the question came, we did address it, and it was about, if someone does not accept the thesis, and you pose the opposite thesis, and they still don't accept it, and then you're just kind of a ping pong ball going back and forth and you're not going anywhere in the debate because you just keep accepting, denying, and that is not the most fruitful way to have a debate. So what the underlying question though, or I suppose an aspect of that question was that I'll just read it out to you what the question. Let's see, we have another comment that okay, good, I will address that next. So the question that was actually being asked, the thesis statement was, right? So the way they word it follows that all mail-in votes are fraudulent. So this was the example given on day 1. So if you notice, what do you notice about this statement? Well, and so then the person said why. They said it follows all mail-in votes are not fraudulent. They also said why, right? What you notice about this statement is that there is no subject that's explicitly set aside. In other words, take the subject. All votes. It follows they are fraudulent. So first step is to do that. Always explicitly say, take the subject, consider the subject. Another way to say it, and you've seen or heard, let's examine. That's a fine way to say it. The word subject, if anyone has questions about it, I can discuss it, but for now, just know we have to somehow use some language to explicitly point out, here's the subject, the basis of our debate, the thing that we're investigating, we're learning, we're looking at, what are its various qualities. So now the subject has become all mail-in votes. Now what are you saying? Whenever you say all, so there's two ways of doing it, and we're just going to put one aside because it goes into a whole slew of other topics that we don't need to focus on right now. The point we need to focus on here is that when we're saying all votes, what we're really saying is, and this is a difference between Western logic and Nalanda logic, to Indian, Tibetan, Nalanda tradition logic. It's a difference in that making a statement about all of something becomes a statement of pervasion, which is a different, it's a statement that's a different nature than just taking a subject and saying, positing some quality about that subject. So what you really want to say to make it clear, to convert your colloquial statement into debate language, is it follows that if something, if X, if it, if something is a mail-in ballot, a mail-in vote, then it is necessarily fraudulent. So now when the answerer says why, that just means that there is no pervasion. So there can still exist mail-in ballots which are fraudulent. There can also exist mail-in ballots which are not fraudulent. It's just denying the pervasion. You're not saying anything affirmative about all mail-in votes being either fraudulent or non-fraudulent, either being legitimate, illegitimate. You're just saying that there is no pervasion. You're just denying the pervasion, right? So the problem when you say all mail-in votes, if you say that they are fraudulent, you're saying there doesn't exist a single one which isn't. If you say all mail-in votes are not fraudulent, then you're saying there doesn't exist a single one which is which is fraudulent, right? All mail-in votes. So you don't want to have to avoid having to say that about the whole collective of every single one. You would just make a statement of pervasion, and then that leaves the openness to there being the possibility of some which are, some which are not. Okay. Now we have a few other questions coming about the question following on the question of one. Now it does seem like most of the students here are familiar with Buddhist philosophy. It seems like most of you are coming from the kind of the Buddhist studies arena more than the sciences or cognitive sciences, which is then appropriate to discuss these kinds of questions, I think, because again, they're not just Buddhist philosophy, they're, to some degree an integral component of Nalanda debate itself. Now, before though I answer this question, any other comments on the last question or any confusion about that last question? So again, just to rephrase it, if you thinking of are all cloud colors primary, all cloud colors primary, secondary colors, sorry, are all cloud colors secondary colors? Are all cloud colors secondary colors? So that's like a colloquial question, right? So then if you just say, it follows that all cloud colors are secondary colors, it follows that all cloud colors are not secondary colors. Well, you don't want to affirm either of those because there exist some which are secondary colors, some which are not. So you say it follows if something is a cloud color, it necessarily is a secondary color as a question. And then when you deny it, you're just leaving open that possibility that there could be some which are, could be some which aren't, right? There necessarily are some. I mean, you're saying there are some which aren't. Okay. Do we see any? So if there are no other questions or comments about that, then we'll go on to Boris's question here. Okay, is that a question? Yes, go ahead. Whoever anonymous is. No, okay, maybe that's not a question. So that's fine. If you have a question, just speak up. So consider the subject. So Boris is positing a subject. Consider the subject, identity from among the four pervasions. It follows that from among which I believe he is saying equivalence, I think he's using another phrasing. It follows that from among the two, one entity and one, it is one entity. Right, so again, here we want to just clarify terms, and it gets confusing because there are so many different ways to translate or use terms. So identity would be the same thing as saying oneness, being one, being identical, being the same, being one isolate, like form and form, right? Cup and cup. those are one, they're identical, they're one isolate. That means that they have identity, right? Identical. Having the relationship of equivalence is not the same as that, right? The relationship of equivalence just means that if something else, so you have two things like form and suitable as form, form, a definiendum, suitable as form, a definition. They're different things, different phenomena, different objects of mind, objects of thought, objects of knowledge. They can be talked about in distinct ways. We can say that one is a definiendum. We can't say that about the other one, right? We can't say that that which is suitable as form is a definiendum. True, validly say that is a true statement. But we can say that form is a definiendum. Likewise, we can't say that form is a definition, but we can say that that which is suitable as form is a definition. So there are different qualities of these two different phenomena, but they are equivalent, which means that any third object that you can think of, which is form, a third thing, like a pot, a cup, colors, shapes, that if form is a quality of that third thing, this common ground, then suitable as form is also necessarily a quality of that third thing. Colors. Form is a quality of color because color is form. So that means that suitable as form is also a quality of color because color is suitable as form. So you're looking at a third item or phenomenon which is the common locus. The locus means like the area for other things to be able to exist, the common ground. It has these other characteristics of being form and being suitable as form. Now, that's why form and external form have only 3 joints, because something like color, it has those qualities of both form and external form, but there's no pervasion between being form and being external form, because something like the eye sense power has the quality of being form, but it is not a common locus of both form and external form, because it is not external form, it is internal form. Okay. So so it's not one. It is not the same as saying one entity. A different question is if things are equivalent. If two phenomena are equivalent, then it follows they are necessarily one entity. That's another question, and that would be seemingly yes, as far as I can tell. So if it means that things are one entity, posit something that is both mutually exclusive and an identity, follows the subject of two truths, are both mutually exclusive and one entity. Yeah. So they're not an identity because they're not one, but they are one entity, and yes, they are both mutually exclusive and one entity. And that's a philosophical question in relation to how one way of breaking up phenomena, of creating different categories. You have the large umbrella category of phenomena. Within that, you have two truths. You have ultimate truths and conventional truths. And there are many different ways of breaking them up. Like in physics, we might break them up by, kind of saying that there's, the scientific picture of the world and the manifest image of the world. That's one way some people like to talk about it, and that they're mutually exclusive, they're contradictory. When you have something that's the manifest image, the way things appear in a kind of gross, ordinary way, then those are one category of objects, and then the way things actually exist when you go and investigate them in a more refined way, then you have the scientific image. And we could talk about that in different Buddhist schools. There are various ways of also talking about that. Okay, so questions have been addressed. I hope they've been addressed sufficiently for people. Any more questions, raise your hand. And if not, I will go on, or raise them. I'll keep an eye out. But what we'll do now is go on to check out a few documents that are now up in the Day 3 channel, which will be helpful for going through our current topic of these joints, these possibilities. So what are those? Let me do a screen share. And please, if you haven't already seen them, please go download them now. So Day 3 channel has 3 new documents in it. One that Marika had just put up during the last session, and then 2 that were put up just in the break time. So let me screen share for you. And this document, and this is the beautiful thing about having a group of students who are really dedicated and really interested in the material that we're studying. So this was actually created by Venerable Thupten Ching. So thank you so much. It's wonderful, and this is another way that will help us understand. So she has the terminology of both the sort of traditional, you could say, the sort of Hopkins lineage, I guess you could say probably. Jeffrey Hopkins is one of the primary translators of Tibetan Buddhist literature and creating a pretty thorough vocabulary and terminology in English of the Tibetan terms. So we have both terminologies, that one and the one that I'm speaking with using. So so we have the pervasions or the joints, possibilities is another way you could say that. And so there's just the Venn diagrams together with their explanations right next to it and examples. And again, this is just another visual aid with the examples right there on the side. And so it's quite helpful. So if we, yeah, I think people can go through that, look at that on your own, the material we've gone through, but the more you read about it and the more you think about it, the clearer it becomes. Here she did list the mutually inclusive, aka equivalent, as 2 joints. Now that's funny because traditionally, or in Tibetan, we don't talk about 2 joints, but that really is what it is, right? So that's fine to say, it makes perfect sense, right? There's 2 possible things to be going on when you compare phenomena which are equivalent. Everything that exists is either both of them or neither of them, right? There exists nothing which is one but not the other, so that's not a possibility. There's no joint there. So, for instance, form and suitable is form, pot is both, consciousness is neither. Those are the 2 possibilities, the 2 joints. So very good, very well put. So thank you very much. And seeing that kind of initiative definitely pleases the instructors and is very helpful to the other students as well, and the future people in the future. If people still, hopefully after these 5 days, people still will want to be studying debate, so it will be very helpful. So the next document that we have is what Marika had created and put up while we were actually in the last session, but just to reiterate that this is now our script. This is our template for how to phrase our questions about pervasions. Can you posit the relationship between A and B in terms of equivalence, contradiction, 3 joints, and 4 joints? I accept. Posit them. And then you would say you just choose one, the defender. So say form and suitable is form. Equivalent. So now posit something which is both A and B. Good. So, and now then you can go on and ask. It follows, right? Take the subject, a pot. It follows it is form. I accept. It follows its form because. So you can now, ask the defender for reasons to support why they posited that example. So the defender posits an example, and then you can ask them for reasons to support that thesis that a pot, your subject, is both a form and is suitable as form. So it follows its form. Yes, I accept. Why? Because it is something made from clay or something made from is not necessarily made from clay, but something made from a hard material such as plastic or clay. It follows that it is suitable as form. Yes, I accept. Why? Because it is external form. You can say something again that's in the lower hierarchy, lower down in the hierarchy, something that's equivalent. Now, this is what we'll be using when we go in practice now. So we will definitely keep this template open in your documents.
So I actually have a question about my own document, which is I kindly suggested how that the challenger will try very hard to come up with counter examples. But suppose we find such a counter example, what happens? So say now the challenger says, well, so there is, but what about, so maybe you would say, I can't quite come up with a good example, but you're maybe trying to argue about the relationship between trees and Christmas trees, and then Christmas trees in general would be plants, but then there's also fake Christmas trees that are made out of plastic, right? So that might be a counter example. So normally you would say that Christmas trees are a subset of trees, but then the challenger says, okay, so now the Christmas tree, how do they ask about that counter example?
So very good on the fly example. Now, it just depends on who is accepting which thesis. If so, let's just say that now in this situation, the defender has asserted that there are three joints between a Christmas tree and a tree, and when you ask them which pervades which, and then they say if they say that if something is a Christmas tree, it is necessarily a tree. If something is a Christmas tree, it is necessarily a tree, right? So then the challenger says, "Oh, really? If something is a Christmas tree, it's necessarily a tree." Then take the subject, and that's where you give your counterexample. Take the subject, a plastic Christmas tree. It follows that it's a tree. Follows it's a tree because it's a Christmas tree. That was the pervasion. And then you can spend some time, and they might accept it to be a tree. They, right? So that's why debating these joints is so fruitful, because it really does lead you into thinking about trying to think of counterexamples, and then really moving forward and creating some debate where you have to use some logic, some reason to hold the position. Either you're going to say that the plastic Christmas tree is a tree or not. So if it's a tree, then does that mean it is able to utilize photosynthesis and take in sunlight and has roots, right? Those are the characteristics of a tree. Okay, so you get the picture. Good. And we have one comment checking that quickly. Okay. So this is a question it's just to me so others can't see it, but I will address it. That can you posit and it follows that you can posit something are different phrasing. So why are there both of those, or what's the difference? So here it's a stylistic decision that we're trying to help the language become comfortable and be able to be used in a fluid manner. So just saying, can you posit something, or even just, can you tell me something, or even just, what is what is something that is A but not B? What is something that is both A and B? We're just giving different options. And if that's confusing because it's too much to have to learn new terms and then also think, well, there's three options for the terms, I could see how that would be too much. So just stick with what's written in the script. That's an easy way to to do it. But these questions. So when we're looking at the screen share and it says, "Can you posit something that is A, but not?" I think this is a typo. A, but not B. Um, oh no, yeah, A, but not B. Right? Yeah. So that would be. It follows you can posit something that is A, but not B. It means the exact same thing, just two alternative ways of saying it. Okay, so now we've come to, okay, we've had about 25 minutes. Let me just then give that last document just to show it to you so you know what to use when we go and have our breakout groups to debate. So last session we had time more to discuss and not so much time to debate in breakout groups. So this time we'll just start right away with debating. And the last document now, it just gives some examples. So if you haven't, again, downloaded this, it is in the day 3 channel. Oh, did I open it? Okay, no, I didn't. Sample. Let me just open the file so that you can see it. Good. So this is just counting the joints of debate. So this is also, it's not really a counting debate in the same way as just listing definitions and divisions, but we just call it counting the joints, or it's just an easy way to think of it, right? But it really is more like a logic debate. So counting the joints of debate, example worksheet. So we have two objects compared. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 examples, okay? Form and external form. Then we have form and one. Now this is again is that concept that we went over. Oneness, identity. When two things are one, what is it like? I mean, it's funny just to say when two things are one because they're not actually two things, right? But when you have a phenomenon which is one, you can phrase it as if it's two things, just with you use the conjunction and you have the same word repeated. So form and form. If that subject, right, it's not really two things, but if that subject, form and form, you're comparing them and they are one, right? Form is one. So we're comparing form and one. So this actually is, you would just say, take the subject form, take the subject the color white. That is both form and one. For something to not be one, you have to have two distinct phenomena in your subject. Take the subject, the color white and the color red. The color form and shape. Shape and color. You have to have a dual subject. Then it becomes no longer one because it's different, distinct. They are different. Form and that which is suitable as form, those two are equivalent. So when something's equivalent, unless you actually, as the challenger, you really have a doubt about it, or you really want to challenge it, then you can just say, okay, they're equivalent. Why? Why are they equivalent? Because there's a mutual pervasion. It's called, for those of you who know, which I know many of you do, the 8 doors of pervasion. 8 doors of pervasion would be the reason to prove. So if you say, take the subject, form, and that which is suitable as form, it follows they are equivalent. I accept. It follows they are equivalent because the reason the defender can give, because they have the 8 doors of pervasion. So that means that, just using A and B, if something is A, it's necessarily B. If something is B, it's necessarily A. If A exists, B necessarily exists. If B exists, A necessarily exists. If something is not A, it is necessarily not B. If something is not B, it is necessarily not A. If A does not exist, B necessarily does not exist. If B does not exist, A necessarily does not exist. So our 8 doors. Okay, 8 doors of pervasion. So, and then contradictory, the subject's form and consciousness. Of course, this can be debated. Why not? So something being contradictory, a reason to prove that would simply be, so again, here we don't ask for examples, right? Instead, we just ask for why, right? Take the subject's form and consciousness, it follows that they are contradictory. I accept. They're contradictory because, so you ask why. You don't say give an example because there is no example. They're contradictory. There's nothing which is both of them. So anything which is one is necessarily not the other, right? So you don't have to go through all the other things. You just say why and what's the reason? Because there does not exist a common ground or a common locus of those two. Okay. And then we have a few where there are 3 joints, 4 joints, and you guys can go and use these examples or use similar ones. Look at it and say, okay, form and external form. Why don't we try form and internal form? Why don't we try form and form source? Why don't we try form and sound source? Use again our list of all these different categories, the colors and so forth, or the chart. And then you can use your just whatever you desire to debate about, but keeping the similar form. And again, what is that form? It is in the template. Okay, so here the only thing that it doesn't say in this template is that when you have the three joints, one of the things that you also ask after, so right after someone asserts that they have three joints. So again, take the subject, form and external form, right? Can you posit the difference in terms of three joint, in terms of equivalence, contradiction, three joints or four joints? I accept. Posit it. They have three joints. So if they have three joints, then the next thing the questioner or challenger says is, so which pervades which? So that's the one thing that's not on this sheet. So if you just can keep it in mind, you want to get them to say which pervades which, and then the defender should say it in a statement of pervasion. If something is an external form, it is necessarily a form. If something is a form, it is not necessarily an external form. And that is written, so you could kind of copy and paste it or just look at the two documents together. That is written in this sheet. Something is external form, it is necessarily form. And it should actually have, here it has the next sentence. So these were not completely edited yet. So it follows, so as we would say, if something is a long shape, it is necessarily suitable to be shown as a shape. If something is suitable to be shown as a shape, it is not necessarily long shape. So you just state the pervasion in both ways. If it is A, it is necessarily B. If it is B, it is not necessarily A. And then you ask, okay, what is something? Can you posit something that's both? Posit something which is B but not A, whichever way it goes. Good. So if we're good on all of that, is that pretty clear to people? Well, of course, we can ask a question. Anyone have a question? If you need to ask it, now is a good time. I'm looking at the hands. If not, we will break out into groups and practice these counting of the joints of the possibilities. No hands are up. Okay, so let's go again. We'll go for 20 minutes. And I would say that spend 5 minutes going through a counting debate. That's again just listing out the definitions and divisions. And you can follow the script exactly, or you can just use the charts and pick a different subject instead of shape or color. You can choose sound source, odor source, right? So you decide. And then after, just don't spend the whole session, the whole 20 minutes, after 5 minutes or so, then move into a counting joints debate. So then pick two phenomena, two of the things. Okay, sound source and sounds arisen from elements conjoined with consciousness. Odor source and manufactured odors. Odor source and form. Whichever, right? You can. So some people are more experienced. You would feel happy to choose your own topics, your own subjects. For those who are brand new, you are perfectly um, you're welcome to just use what's already here. Okay, good. And I will come and check around on people. So try again pairs, and if you really feel like you'd rather hear some other people, and you can join another pair. Okay. I don't know if you can hear me. If you're having some technical issues or anything, just let us know. Okay. Ishe. So
Yeah,
let's see if do you wanna just try with. I'm wondering if you want to try and grab someone from a bigger group because that group has a bunch of people and they might.
that's what I'm
Let
thinking.
me go check. I'll just go
But
ask. Okay, you can. Yeah, you can just check. Okay.
Suppose it has a definition. I accept. Posited. Take the subject external form. The definition of it is that which is suitable to be a form, and it is not inside the continuum of the person. Yeah, great. So take the subject external form. It follows that it is defined as that which is suitable as form and not included within the I would say take the subject that which is suitable as form and not included within the continuum of a person. It follows that this is the definition of external form. Accept. Good. Okay, so take the subject external form. It follows it has divisions. Accept. Positum. External form. Its divisions are what's in English? The isos, eye object, ear object, smell object, taste object, and tactile objects. Yeah. I mean, so here it says like form source, sound source, odor source, taste source, physical object source. It follows that those are the divisions of external form. Accept. Cool. Okay. And then I guess let's move into the color. So take the subject color. It follows. It has a definition. Accept. Positive. Take the subject color. Its definition is that which is suitable to be represented as a hue. That which is suitable to be shown as a hue. It follows that is the definition of color. Accept. Okay, great. So I think we got the counting debates pretty well covered. So let's move into the more the pervasions question. So take the subject, or no, let's just say, can you posit the relationship between color and primary color? I accept. Okay, positive. The relation between color and primary color is three possibilities. Okay, there are three possibilities. Yeah, and then I would say why. The relation between color and internal color and what was the primary color is three possibilities because primary color is pervaded by color. everything which is a primary color is a color, and not everything which is a color is necessarily a primary color. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, so we've already covered the which pervades which case, so maybe that would be replacing why. So I've actually updated my pervasion template. So, and this is actually great practice because I can update my pervasion template even better. So this is very productive.
Hey Boris, how you doing? Did you?
I was a bit late. I had to check my emails and do something, so
Oh, no problem. Okay. So yeah, we can go if you want another partner. There are a few groups where there are multiple people, but yeah, we can
yeah,
also
I
just
can
do it.
join
You
another
can,
group, no problem.
yeah.
Yeah, but you're doing this wonderfully, really. It's so nice. Oh, and you put so much effort in it, and you
Yeah,
feel it. It's your dedication, and I find it really amazing, wonderful to
and
put this all together. It's so much work, I know, but it's really so
yes, and
good. Really nice.
we're learning as we go. It's the first time we've ever tried something like
Yeah,
this, but we're glad that you made it and that actually there's a really good group of dedicated students. So I
yeah,
think that is possible to maybe have more programs in the future that are like this. Because
yeah.
debate does take time to figure out, right? Thank
Yeah,
you.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm not at the time to come to the Jeffrey Hopkins sessions on Wednesday often, but
Right,
if you
right.
started in that format already, it's quite interesting to go over the material in that way.
Oh, you're saying like a weekly meeting or something for
Yeah, the
something like
weekly
this?
meeting, yeah,
Yeah.
we could
Well, we'll
try.
think about something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah,
Well, why don't we
yeah.
practice, or do you want to find another partner so you can have some time to practice with them?
Yes, I look around. I
Okay.
look
Okay,
around.
great.
Yeah.
See you,
Okay.
Boris.
Thank
See you
you.
on Tuesday. Stefan, if you're not busy, Boris still needs a partner. He came late, he said, but I'm just going around to check on different people. Okay.
All right.
He may find another partner.
Okay. I'll have a look in a second whether I'm found one. If not, it's the reason. So that's it. So I think it's because indicates the reason rather than the privation. Okay. And then the privation is yeah, in the logic debate, it says in the beginning, this, the question in Nala debate format a statement of privation. So, oh, yes, yes, that is good. So maybe we just practice this logic debate, the cloud colors version 1. So the statement of privation is they state the color, but the privation is determined by the predicate. It is necessarily a second color. So whether it's like elephant versus animal, or the animal, uh, animal pervades the elephant, or
I think this is a good thing that we need to bring up for the whole group, but I'll just say while we still have more than 10 minutes so you can keep debating. A statement of pervasion doesn't actually have an explicit subject and predicate. It is a different nature of question or statement. It's a different type of uh, of statement. So you're not statement of pervasion is not this kind of logical syllogism. It's a different format. So when you make the statement of pervasion, if something is an elephant, it follows it's necessarily an animal. Then if someone denies it, they posit a subject which is an elephant but not an animal. So then you're taking a subject which you have to then look at in turn. Is it A, an elephant? Is it B, an animal? So it's like you take a third thing and then you make that your subject, and then you see those two things in the statement of pervasion, you put them each in the predicate place one by one, and then you see what I'm saying? So you're saying there's a different thing which is one but not the other if you're denying a pervasion.
So to go back, so you have the subject and the predicate and the statement of pervasion. And the statement of pervasion is a container in which you put the subject and the predicate
Not
one by
really a
one.
subject. That's what I'm trying to say is that the statement of pervasion actually doesn't really have a subject. What you're saying is any old subject in the universe that you wish to posit, so you leave that as a variable, x. The subject, you're just thinking x. That x has now as its predicate elephant or animal. So if the predicate of something, another thing, like the African elephant, right? Take the subject, the African elephant, it follows that it is an elephant. Take the subject, African elephant, it follows that it is an animal. So now you're thinking about, that's why it's pervasion, because it makes you think about everything in the universe that has this one quality of being an elephant. Does it also have to have this other quality of being an animal? So it's like the subject you want to have open in your mind. Okay, all the different subjects I can think about. Is it an elephant? Then it also is an animal. Is there something which is an elephant but not an animal? A separate thing that you would posit as the subject. Mm. Maybe it's just something that takes a little bit of time to go through it. But if you use some of those examples, it might get more clear.
Right.
Yeah, I will say bye.
Okay. Take the subject mental conscious anger. Take this. No, it is a form of mental consciousness.
It is a form. No, why?
Anger is not a form of mental consciousness.
Yeah, I agree. I accept.
Can you posit an example of mental consciousness?
Mental consciousness. Example of mental consciousness. The first movement of my mind. Thinking about flower. That is an example of mental.
So take the subject, the first moment of mind, apprehending flower. That is a form.
Yeah, I agree.
So when you say no pervasion and I ask you what is the no pervasion, you will say what?
So, yeah, I'm a little bit confused there.
So there we will say if it is made of wood, it doesn't necessarily follow that it is a tree.
A tree. Okay.
See, once you understand it, then you will be able to come up with an example. For example, the wooden table. Wooden table is made of wood, but it is not a tree.
Yeah.
So my pervasion is wrong. But the reason that it's wrong.
Yeah, but then what happens with the subject?
When you're checking the pervasion, you are not worried about the subject.
Oh.
You're only looking at the predicate and the reason. Yeah.
Okay. And then you compare the reason with against the predicate.
Yeah, that is it. So
And not the predicate against the reason. Sorry.
yeah, so
form and that which is suitable as form. I think tree works for both of them. But so form is, I think, definiendum, and that which is suitable as form is the definition of form. So I think maybe my question would be, if they're mutually, whatever it is, equivalent, if they're equivalent, then what is the relationship? Is there something that is a so are they, is definition and definiendum both? Is there a common locus between definition and definiendum? I don't know if that's
yeah, because they are exactly the same. They are like in the Venn diagram. They are like the two circles that are completely overlapping. So there's nothing which is the one but not the other.
But isn't form a definiendum and that which is suitable as form a definition?
Yeah, but that's why. It's the definition of the definiendum. I don't know. So I think that's why they're like 100% equivalent. If you name an example for one thing, then it's necessarily also the other.
So may
And
I
if you
just
name something which
suggest,
is not the one, then it's necessarily not the other also.
so you guys are having a great dialogue and it's exactly where you should be going. So now Kabir, she has a thesis, right?
Yes.
So what do
I
you
would
do?
say
You want to
I would
posit
say
something that is a definition but not a definiendum, right? And question her on it.
okay, so I would say take that which is suitable as form. It follows it is the definition of form, but is not the definiendum of form, and therefore there is something which is not a common locus between form and that which is suitable as form. Does that make sense at all?
We'll try and just take it one
Yeah.
by one. Just do one thesis statement and then see how she responds, and then just do one reason and see how she responds. So don't lay out the whole thing just yet, right? Try and go
Okay.
based on her answer. So just take a subject that follows it is. So the
Okay, so
subject's suitable as form, it
take
follows it
that.
is a definition.
Sorry, okay. Okay. So take that which is suitable as form, it follows it is a definition.
Can you give an example? Or why?
Okay.
So what's the
Why is
reason?
that which is suitable as form a definition? Is that the question? Because it's connected topics. Okay, I don't know. Let's take another example. Say, take that which is momentary. If it follows, it is the definition of impermanent.
I accept.
Okay, so take impermanent. It follows, it is the definiendum of that which is momentary.
I accept.
Okay, so take a definition and a definiendum, it follows that there are two distinct phenomena.
Except.
Now, again, if you're going to just go based on her accepted pervasion, right? You start with the pervasion statement. It follows that. She's saying they're equivalent, right? Definition, definiendum. It follows that if something is a definition, it's necessarily a definiendum. Are you saying you're gonna answer?
No pervasion, I would say.
No, but you were saying there is, right? I'm sorry, I don't know who is who, but Rasa maybe?
No, I
So
think Marlena.
Marlena was saying it that they are, but I would say a
So,
definition and a definiendum are mutually
right.
exclusive.
So just to illustrate like the order. So it follows if something is a definition, it is necessarily a definiendum. That's the question for Marlena.
Why?
Why? It follows that it is because definition and definiendum are mutually inclusive, equivalent. They have the 8 doors of pervasion. If it's A, it's necessarily B. If it's B, it's necessarily A. So that's a reason. The reason is they're equivalent.
I'm confused now. Um,
I have a question. So, for an example of these situations where have mutually inclusive, that one is basically the other, I can only think of objects in planet Earth and objects in Mars, let's say. It's the same. To be in the same, I would think, or to be a particle and a wave, like the electron. That would be the example of being the same thing or equivalent. I don't know, but
You could assert that as some example of two things which are equivalent, wave and particle. You could that would be a very nice position or create a good debate.
Yeah.
So then the question is, yeah.
Because this is the mind-boggling part where it's the same thing. How can you even debate that? Yeah.
Well, that's the mind-boggling thing is that.
I think it helps clarify your understanding whether it is the same thing.
Right.
I think that's what we're trying to do. Is
Right.
so we don't know if it's the same thing. So when I said earlier on the stage that mind is internal form, but I was wrong. But I think that's what we're trying to.
Okay, everybody, sorry for interrupting, but when you are able to bring it to a close, let's wrap it up and meet back in the temple. So why don't we, as we wait for some people to wander in, just check if there are questions amongst the people who are already here, and we can start addressing them, or at least have you pose them, so that way, when more people come, we can start quickly. I'll look for hands, or you can type them. Okay, so far so good. So how has that been, practicing those pervasions? Good. It's good. And I really want to just say that I don't know exactly the people who have experience in debate where each of you are coming from. We have the document where you in the registration form stated some of your background. So I know there are a diversity of backgrounds, but many people are coming from Atisha's course at the Lama Tsongkhapa Institute. And so it's very evident what an amazing teacher he is and how you've really all progressed very well in his course there, because some of you are really doing quite well and helping the other students, which is key, which is very good. And yeah, he is really a true scholar and expert. Atisha there is incredible.
Yeah, and also I wanted to just mention, I mean, as a side point, but something that came up in our discussion in our little group was that I realized that how often we make these pervasion mistakes in our reasoning in everyday life. So I was reflecting on, how often we make an equivalence of, say, the person who cuts you off on the street and malicious people. Whereas maybe it's actually more like a 3 possibilities or actually even a 4 possibilities situation where there's malicious people and people that cut you off on the roads, and there's of course maybe some overlap between malicious people and people who cut you off on the road, but actually there's a large amount of people that are cutting you off on the road but not malicious, but they might be just busy to try to get somewhere because their child is needing help or whatever. And so this was an example that I thought was quite motivating to really dive into the privations.
That's right. And if some of you haven't yet watched the video with Venerable Thupten Chödrön, who herself has taught debate in her nunnery, which is Sravasti Abbey in Washington State, in the U.S. So they went through one of Daniel Perdue's books, who, for those of you who don't know, is sort of the main Western scholar who's taught about debate and written about debate in English, who unfortunately has passed away a few years ago. But she went through one of his whole books for more than a year with her nuns there, Venerable Thupten Chödrön, and so she has a very good perspective on how to use it as really in this way in day-to-day life in order to regulate your emotions, and for Dharma practitioners, for mind training, right? This is a real method of mind training. So that video it was posted in the Day One channel. Please go and check that out if you haven't yet. It's called Mindfulness Corner, Using Syllogisms in Daily Life. So that's very true. And the pervasions, or I should say, holding a pervasion which is not true to be true, is one of the main logical mistakes that as human beings we make. It's what modern day cognitive science refers to as bias. This is really one of I'm not gonna say here now that they're equivalent because we have to check it out, but I don't want to say something and then have to backtrack. But it is very close, the concept of bias in general, cognitive bias, right? So we have racial cognitive bias, right? So you see someone of a certain race do something and you don't like, oh, those people are, you know, those people are lazy, those people are cheap, those people are, you're accepting a pervasion. I mean, oftentimes it's stereotype. You've never even seen something to confirm that. It's just like people like talk about it that way because of who knows why. But anyway, you're holding this pervasion. If someone is someone of that other ethnicity, they're necessarily having this characteristic, this trait, right? And likewise, so people who, believe the coronavirus is a hoax. It's like, I have a friend, I'll just very quickly give a true story, right? Confessions, but a very close friend who is, an intelligent person. So we're not saying anything about, we're not trying to say people are this or that. We have mistaken views. That's something that we have to acknowledge, so, oh, he thinks the whole thing is a hoax, this and that. And then his evidence, right? What is he thinking? Well, there's all these videos online of medical professionals who are saying that coronavirus is a hoax or is not as it's described in the mainstream. something. And so what's his idea? Oh, if there exist medical professionals who say coronavirus is a hoax, it must necessarily be a hoax. Right? Or if there exists medical professionals who say that some phenomenon is untrue, then it must necessarily be untrue. But you see how quickly we will run into logical problems if we really hold that pervasion. Let me see if there were a couple. There was one question, and then just one question here by Betty. So thank you. Yes. So there's been, and some of the confusion that people have is I see it's getting worked out in your groups because you're working through it. Some of the people have more experience. So I realize that a lot of the questions that are coming up are being answered by your classmates, and that's wonderful. So thank you all who are doing that. So just to clarify for the whole group, what is the order of a statement of pervasion? So I actually heard a bit of what Betty was talking about in her part with her partner when I was walking around. So I will address beyond just what's written here, but it's saying, does it begin the logic debate? Must certain elements be established before a statement of pervasion? So that's one aspect. That's the question you're asking. And I'll also address what you were talking about before because it would be helpful to clarify for everyone, I think. So a statement of pervasion often begins a logic debate, and when you look through the debate texts, they will most commonly be the first line in a scripted debate or a written out debate. It will often be a statement of pervasion. It will not always be. So the answer is quite simply is it does not have to begin the logic debate. There's no pervasion that if something is a logic debate, it necessarily starts with a statement of pervasion. But it oftentimes does. And it's a good way to start it because that's basically like you're setting out a theory of something, right? You know, what's the theory here? The theory is that, you know, just again, going back to the clouds and secondary colors, it's a simple one, right? All the phenomena, all the colors that could possibly be cloud colors, they also are secondary colors. Okay, so that's sort of like your theory you're setting out. So I'm calling it a theory in this now, is that really the best word? I'm just calling it that in order to set out that we're talking about a universal statement, right? It's like we're creating sort of an idea of some universal law, right? Whatever is momentarily changing is necessarily impermanent. Whatever is created from causes is necessarily momentarily changing. That's like, a universal law, a statement of universal law. So that's oftentimes how you would start. And must certain elements be established before a statement of pervasion? So again, the counting debate is the typical traditional way that you start it. So when you start the very beginning of your debate, you just lay out some of the framework that's in the textbook. And then when you actually begin the logic debate, so the question is about the logic debate, then you would begin the statement of pervasion. And that establishes, right, that theory. So whether the defender accepts or denies it, it at least establishes their view on it, right? So maybe if they don't accept it, then you ask them to posit some example which does not fulfill the pervasion. They don't accept that if something is the color of a cloud is necessarily a secondary color. Ask them for an example and start your debate from that example. And if they accept it, then you can try to find something which is a color of a cloud but not a secondary color as the challenger. Now, what we're doing here with the joints is another option. This is more of a training. So again, it doesn't directly get you into its own sort of, it's a way to bring you into a logic debate. So to answer Betty's question again, there's no definite way to go, but going through some of these joints, comparing some of the phenomena in the topic you're currently studying or looking at, form within form, you want to compare some of these different divisions. That's a good way to go. That's a foolproof way to start a real debate going, because at least you have something to work with. You have a framework. You have, okay, well, it's either going to have three possibilities, three joints. It's either going to, or four joints, or it's going to be contradictory or equivalent. So you have this sort of thing that you can choose. Okay, it's got to be one or the other. If you don't know, if you're totally like, I don't even know what this means, then, like, I don't even know what suitable as form means, but I'll just guess. Okay, I'll say suitable as form and long shapes have, okay, I'll just guess three joints. You can guess, and that allows a debate to unfold. So the other point that Betty had mentioned, though, that I do want to address, and thank you for bringing this up, or thank you for allowing me to hear as you were bringing it up with your partner. Confusion about, in a statement of pervasion, it follows that if something is the color of a cloud, it is necessarily a secondary color. Where's the subject? Or what is the subject? What is the predicate in that statement of pervasion? That's a question that could arise and has arisen for some of you. The answer is there is no subject. The answer is there is no subject that has been stated in the statement of pervasion. That's why we say if something is. The something is a variable. If X is, if some people are using, I think the way Atisha does do it, is that if it is, so he just uses the word it. If X is, if it is, if something is, doesn't matter how you phrase it, as long as you understand what it means, that you're leaving the space as a variable such that whatever thing in the universe you can think about as a subject, anything else that you want to posit as a subject, a third thing. So you have the two things in question in your statement of pervasion, color of cloud, secondary color. If something is A, it's necessarily B. That something, that X, that it, that's the subject. Something else that you have to posit, something else that you have to come up with. The example that you're coming up with is now going to become a subject, and then you check it by putting the things that you had in your pervasion, your statement of pervasion, in the place of the predicate. Take the subject, the color of a red cloud at dusk, it follows that it is the color of a cloud. It follows that it is a secondary color, right? So you could put it, and then of course the statement of pervasion indicates that if it's accepted, then the meaning is that you should be able to now put the first item in the statement of pervasion in the predicate place and the second item in the reason place and have that be a valid syllogism if it all checks out. Meaning, if someone accepts that if something is the color of a cloud, it's necessarily a secondary color. Well, let's use one where there's no confusion. If something is a color, it's necessarily form, right? There's no confusion. So now you should be able to take a third thing as your subject, take the subject, right? The sound of rainfall. It follows that, sorry, I said color, didn't I? take the subject, the color red. Okay, it follows that it is form because it is color. It follows that it is form is your predicate because it is color. So the statement of pervasion was, I think I actually said the order, I know I said the order wrong, so apologies for that. So you have your statement of pervasion. You should be able to put the second item, if it's true, in the place of the predicate, and the first item in the place of the subject. Okay, so this is the correct way to say it. The first item here is color. The second item is form. If something is color, it's necessarily form. I accept. Okay, then take the subject, the color red. It follows that it's form. If someone denies it, why? It follows that it's form because it is color. It follows its form because it is color. That's the pervasion. So when you have a pervasion, again, it means that you're looking just at the reason and the predicate, the relationship between the reason and the predicate. Whatever is the reason is necessarily the predicate. Okay, now we have a couple more questions that have come up. We had the challenge. A lemon is sour, and the question, what does it mean? What does is mean? Yes. What does is mean? Good question. Does it apply equivalence or, as in colloquial language, having the quality of? How would you formulate these relationships correctly? Apply, implying, imply? Does it imply? Oh, you meant to say imply.
Yeah, yeah, it just
Yeah.
wants to correct the
Yes, it's a
statement.
correction. Thank you. Okay. Right. This like you have like logical symbols and then just like correction. So does it imply equivalence? It does not imply equivalence. It does also not imply having the quality of. Okay, that's the easy way to answer. So it implies being something, right? So this is a tricky thing. It's again a slightly different way of thinking about things, but having the quality of something, for instance, a pen here has the quality of the color black. It has the color black, but is it the color black?
And so I'm also wondering, like, wouldn't if you get around to the statement of a lemon is sour in debate, wouldn't that be a perfect invitation to actually explicitly go debate, like, what is the relationship between lemon and sour, and then you can decide on it yourself in the debate process, figure out what you mean with is.
Yes, and that's the recommended. That's a good way to go about it. So I recommend we recommend doing that. So we'll leave the question, put the question back in your hands. Having said what I said, but really ultimately you have to sit down with it and kind of, in Tibetan there's this phrase. Well, I don't need to say it, but it indicates that what you come to accept, and I have another point to make connected to this, is an issue of what's comfortable in your mind or not. What's sensible to you? What's sensible to you? The point connected to that is our aim here is not to rigidly be searching for and to be demanding that we get the right answer. Okay.
Yeah, or even that we used a particular language, right? As we just have the aim is more to get clear on what language you're using and what we're using and what we're meaning with it, but we can apply the mechanics in principle in whatever conceptual system we want to use.
Right, and I guess again, it does seem like the vast majority of the students who are, actually the full participants coming each session are from a Buddhist background, or maybe not originally, but are students of Buddhism. That just so you know, the Buddhist view, should say probably Galupa, because there could be many different views within that, is that like these five external forms, these five divisions of external form are mutually exclusive, contradictory from each other, like I mentioned. So if we were to accept that a lemon is sour, it is a taste, then because it has a sour flavor, then what would be a logical consequence of that? Well, debate it out, but it seems you would pretty much have to accept that it's also a color because it has a color, right? If it has a property, that would be sort of the pervasion. It follows if something has the property of sourness, it's necessarily sour. If something it follows if something has a property of color, it's necessarily color. If something has the property of shape, it's necessarily a shape. So that would be the way that you would apply the same type of logic equivalently. Now you might want to add something though and go, but no, wait, they're not exactly the same because a lemon not only has the property of color of sourness, has the property of sour taste, but that's its like main most essential property by which we identify it as even being a lemon. Okay, well now you have a new reason, right? That's actually a different reason than simply it has the property of something.
Yeah, and then you can debate it further because you can say, well, a lemon for somebody who's suffering from COVID and who doesn't have the taste properties, right? And then you get into another discussion. So maybe it's not a quality of the lemon by itself, but rather by the taste receptors of the person.
Okay, very good. So if we have no more questions, then we can spend a few more minutes. We only have a few more minutes left, so we'll spend that time just going over, let me just double check. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware that we have this phrase or word, ta. So are people kind of aware of where the ta comes in? Ta combined with combined with the backhand slap. That's something that is, again, it was phrased as being like the punitive thing. Okay, sort of in a sense, but and it's really, again, another marker. So we use, many of the verbal as well as physical motions that are done are multifaceted, but one of the functions is as markers, right? So what's the ta? That's a marker when someone who is the defender, the answerer, reverses a position. Now it has to be a complete 180. They say the color of a red cloud is a secondary color in one moment. 5 minutes later, they accept. I mean, they don't say they accept, right? They accept the color of a cloud, not a secondary color. It's just the direct negation. If they do that, then they get a ta. So just to remind people or people who are not aware of it. And you could also say strike. Strike is an English word, so maybe for people who are not who are native speakers of English, that might be more comfortable. That was a suggestion from a Tibetan friend of mine who I thought it kind of matches nicely to the idea behind the ta, so can use strike. Okay. The another point is, and then so also please do use it, like, it's, again, you don't have to feel like I'm being mean, but it gives you this sense that, okay, that's a formal mark to acknowledge there was an error in the logic, right? Or there was a logical contradiction. So that's helpful. It really is something that allows us to go, and it works, on our ego a little bit. It might stir up an emotion here or there. That's fine. This is a kind of emotional process. But I wanted to point out, one of the things I wanted to discuss today was the value of debate. And so talking about the ta is a good, bridge into that, because one of the values, and there's now a video up in the Day 3 channel that everyone please watch. It's on the value, specifically the cognitive elements of sort of the cognitive training that takes place. We'll put out another one that's on the social elements of debating, because the guest speakers did talk about each of them separately. So, but anyway, the point being, there's this social element where really, and you'll hear the speakers talk about it, but there's this already a group agreement that we're here for each other and we're here to help each other learn. So it's a safe environment. That's the key point I want to bring up. I'm just watching you guys, what the way that I'm hearing the debates go in your little groups and partners is like a beautiful thing to see. It's totally clear to me that you all get this. So I'm just explicitly stating it. So as a safe environment, you know, when someone gives you a ta, you don't have to take it as an attack, or seeing that, the ego, are grasping at wanting to be right, which is there, might just naturally react. Just allow kind of yourself to keep in mind, okay, well, yeah, I didn't like that ta. Especially now, sometimes people do it mistakenly. They over ta, right? They sort of ta when you really didn't reverse a position. So just be patient and know, okay, well, we're just here to learn and help each other learn. Okay.
Yeah, and I would also say, like, in a way, that sa is like a gift. It's like where you then are like, oh, I learned something because I realized that there was a contradiction in this position, which I did not realize before. And so one thing is also that if you get a sa and you don't understand, where it comes from. So we had a bit of that happening in our practice session this morning in Europe. Then spend some time just going through, like, where is that sound? What is inconsistent with what? Because that is phenomenally helpful. I mean, that's what the whole debate is about anyway.
And that's another thing that we actually, in my opinion, or just seeing how debates sometimes get off track, it seems like we, in the traditional forum of a Tibetan monastery, in that environment, we actually don't do enough of repeating and double checking. We kind of just speed along, speed along, speed along. But then oftentimes someone really didn't catch what the challenger was actually trying to say, or literally said. And then you're responding to some different question, and they give you a tie, you don't get it, and you don't. Instead of stopping and repeating it, it just sort of it starts to get off track sometimes. With more experienced debaters, it doesn't really happen, but I think even for the beginning debaters, a way to avoid that, and since time is precious, we don't want to spend a half hour just going in circles about a tzah we didn't even understand. Just stop and say, what was the statement again? Can you repeat it? Or as the challenger, if someone denies a pervasion or doesn't, or says no pervasion, then ask them, okay, what's the pervasion you're denying? Just to make sure you stay on the same page and that you're really following it. Now, the working memory, that's a skill, that's another cognitive skill that increases with time so that you can sort of remember better. Sometimes you just forget, right? What to do. It's natural. Okay, so that's about that. So we are okay. Looks like we're out of time. Are there any questions before people break? There is a question from Lokesh. Okay. Come up and ask your question, please.
Hi, I'm sort of confused with your explanation of an earlier question when you say in a statement of pervasion there is no subject. Yes? And I used to think that when you're making a statement of pervasion, the subject actually is there, which is basically the set of, let's say, your pervasion statement. If it is a color, it follows it as form. In that case, all the colors that you can think of, including the word color itself, probably is this whole set becomes your subject. But if you say that there is no subject, then I'm perplexed to understand. If it is a color, it follows form. What is that thing that we're trying to establish as form? If there's no subject, then there's nothing to establish as form. So I would sort of think that there has to be a subject so that it can be established as form. And I used to think that that subject is actually the set of all the colors possible.
Right. So this is why the statement, take the subject, all colors, it follows they are form. And then the statement, it follows that if something is a color, it is necessarily form. These are actually two different statements that have different meanings. Now, going into if you make the statement, a thesis statement, take the subject, all colors, it follows whatever you say about it in the predicate. What that actually means, that's something that we don't really have the resources to address in this workshop because it involves getting a sense of permanent phenomena and how to distinguish between permanent phenomena versus functioning things or impermanent phenomena, and that's sort of another degree of going deeper into the philosophy and logic. But I'll just to say they are different statements with different meanings, and the subject is what is in your mind when you're thinking over that pervasion. If X is a variable, right? When you see the equation, I forget every equation I ever learned. Someone help me out. What is it? Mx equal. I don't even remember like Pythagoreans. Someone just say one.
What is mx
Plus b.
plus
Okay, y equals mx plus b. Wow. Thank you. So when you see that, what is y? What is m? What is x? What is b, right? Y equals mx plus b. E equals mc squared. Okay, so E equals mc squared. C is something specific, but the E and the m are not. So y equals mx plus b. Those are all just variables. So that means that anything you can imagine anything and stick it in there. Now here in the debate, it can actually be anything, and so in mathematical formula, it's like a quantity, a number. So here we could actually imagine anything that you could imagine, something that exists or doesn't even exist. That's the subject, and you're now trying to just determine, okay, is it color? Is it form? If it's color, does it also have to be form? Is there something which is color but not form? Is there a separate subject, a third thing that wasn't in the statement of pervasion, that has the property or quality of being? Now, I'm not just saying has the property of the property of color. I'm saying the property of being color without having the property of being form. So again, this is the kind of thing that these are some of the questions that really don't start getting clearer until within the structure of logic, the lessons that lead in the traditional Nalanda tradition that lead a student into a deeper understanding of logic, they come at a pretty advanced stage of having really gone through some of the more technical understandings of how the three parts of syllogisms relate to one another, what the reason has to fulfill in order to be a flawless reason, right? The three modes of being a correct reason, I'm sure you're aware of. So, and then how it relates to the predicate and what the different kinds of relationship are. As I was saying, that pervasion is about relationships between things, so how those relationships are established. So that's like a whole nother course that, hey, hopefully we all have the chance to learn about and study. But right now it's a little bit beyond the scope. But in general, yeah. So this in general, the subject is something that you have to simple answer. The subject you have to put into the equation, into the statement of pervasion. Separate thing. Okay, so that did bring us over our timeline a few minutes of ending. So I'll stay back for a couple minutes if anyone else has questions. Otherwise, we will see each other, or I'll see the East Coast people at the debate, and then we'll see everyone else tomorrow morning, and we'll upload some more content. So keep your eye out. We'll put more examples of people doing these joints, counting the joints. We'll put more examples so people can see other people doing it, recorded, examples of that. Okay.
And then I guess in the practice sessions, we'll also practice more about the joints, right? That's
Yes, thank you. So the practice session for today, our debate sessions, we want to focus on going through these joints, and we have enough material here to do that with the few examples and the template, and then we'll also provide some more material just for you to see other people doing it. But this should be good for you to just start working with it. Yeah.
And of course, you can always, with your debate partner, decide. Well, I would like what I ended up doing with my debate partners. We talked about attention and mindfulness, and we thought that was a fun topic. So, we can talk about. You can decide whatever you feel inspired to do.
And I would say, I put as one of the examples here, and just one, it's sound occurring in nature and sound caused by elements conjoined with consciousness. So the point of this is just to illustrate that, just thinking about sound caused by elements conjoined with consciousness, or articulate sound or inarticulate sound, is just not something that like naturally occurs to our minds. But we can think about, okay, sounds in nature. Sure, the sounds of birds and wolves and coyotes and brooks and things, right? So big things that sort of naturally occur to your mind and make sense for you to think about. Not some because again, we don't have time to like go through this whole hierarchy and actually describe what's meant by each of these things and how it relates to the Buddhist philosophy and all this, because it comes out of a certain philosophical view, right? So yeah, feel free to talk about things that are related, but that make more sense to you. Thank you for your comment, Angshuman. That is that I don't exactly understand what you're meaning between form and content, but that does seem like that very well could be. Okay, so I'll stay back for a couple minutes if there are questions, and then everyone, see you next time.
Hi, may I ask a question?
Sure.
So I had a question about red cloud that we've been talking about for quite some time.
Yeah.
So you said earlier in the class today that if something is one color or one of the form divisions, it cannot be another. So I'm just a little confused how you can. So is the red cloud red or is it cloud? Or is that what one will have to debate to figure out?
Sure. I think, well, what would be the way you would think about it? You would debate it, right? So take this subject, the color of a red cloud. It follows that it is the color red. I'll just debate you on it. Follows it is the color red.
Okay, so I would say reason notice. I would say why. Sorry, I wouldn't say reason notice.
It follows it's the color red because it's suitable as a red hue.
Reason not established.
It follows that it is not suitable as a red hue.
I agree.
It follows that it is suitable as a red hue because it is something that multiple parties can look at with their valid eye consciousness and then claim about it. There's a hue which is red.
Reason not established.
Follows that that is not something which is can be claimed by multiple parties to be red.
I agree.
So it follows that it wouldn't be claimed to be either red or white or blue or yellow or green or any color on the color wheel.
How can do I have to say why or I agree, right?
Yep, that's just a predicate. So yeah, statement of thesis.
So why?
So it follows it could be accurately claimed to be one of the colors on the color wheel.
Why?
So it couldn't be accurately claimed to be one of the colors on the color wheel.
I agree.
Okay. So it follows that it has so let's just back up one step and say take the subject, the process of visual perception. It follows that it relies on wavelengths of different frequencies contacting the the cones in the retina.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't catch what you said.
Take the
I apologize.
subject, the process of visual perception. It follows that it depends upon frequencies of electromagnetic radiation contacting the cones in the retina.
I agree.
Right. So it follows that take the subject, the color of a red notebook. It follows that it is perceived by a valid visual consciousness as being red.
I agree.
And it follows that that perception, let's keep the subject as the notebook, right? So the red notebook, it follows that it's appearing to a valid eye consciousness as red depends upon the frequencies, the appropriate, I don't know the total explanation, but the appropriate frequency of EM radiation contacting the cones of a person.
I agree.
Right. So it follows, take the subject, the color of a red cloud, it follows that a visual perception of it being red also arises from the similar spectrum to the visual perception of the red notebook, a similar wavelength of light hitting the cones of a person's retina.
Right.
So it follows that it does not depend on any wavelength of light hitting the person's retina.
No problem.
You're saying why? It does depend on some
Sorry,
frequency.
yeah, so why? I'm saying it depends
Why?
on some frequency, but
But
you're
not the
saying no
red, not the
frequency
frequencies
constituting that.
in the red part of the visible spectrum of light. So which frequency? It follows that you can posit the frequency which it arises from.
Right.
It follows you cannot posit the frequency which it arises from.
I agree.
Okay, so it follows that it arises from a frequency, but you aren't able to determine which one. A frequency of
I
visible
agree.
light. Okay, good. Okay, so
Well,
this is a
sorry,
place where
I
I
don't mean to be pedantic. I don't mean to be pedantic about it. I'm just saying a cloud is a secondary color, so I'm holding the position that you cannot accurately determine the color of a red cloud because there's too many
sure.
colors involved. So I
And
apologize. I don't mean to.
that's
I don't
what
mean to. I don't mean to be. I don't mean to be an ass about it. But I'm
that's
just saying
it.
that.
That's the right way to go. So you just hold the position until you can't bear holding it any longer, until you really get convinced that it doesn't make sense what you're saying. But if you're not convinced, then if I just tell you some statement, you're still not going to be convinced, right? But I
Actually,
would
my
say,
question was different. I'm saying because it's a cloud and a cloud is defined as a secondary color, that was
right,
actually the intent of my question. It wasn't whether it's a red cloud. I'm saying since a cloud per se is
yeah.
defined as a secondary color, then how can you have a primary color further defining a secondary color?
Well,
That was
I
actually
will
the
ask
intent of
you.
it.
So one of the things that we really learn when we start debating is to improve our reading skills, or at least we figure out that we actually misread things a lot. So I want to just ask you, are you
Okay.
sure or double check, is the color of cloud really a secondary color?
Cloud is a secondary color. The color of cloud is not a secondary color, but cloud is a secondary color from what I recall of the collected topics.
Okay, so well, this actually could just be that because we didn't have time to go through it and really discuss what it's saying. So it's not. So I guess I have to right. So there is a point where you have to just explain something, right? It's not that cloud
Okay.
is a secondary color, but cloud, which is a secondary color, the color of cloud, which is a secondary color, is the division of the secondary colors. So that's just the way that it's meant to be understood. So the color of cloud, which is a secondary color, the color of smoke, which is a secondary color, the color of dust, which is a secondary color, the color of mist, which is a secondary color. So there are colors of clouds which are not secondary colors, right? If something is the color of cloud, it's not necessarily a secondary color. That's how it's understood, at least in the Yongzhen Dudra text, right? That's how it's
So,
written that way
when you say
explicitly.
red cloud, I mean, I thought maybe cloud as a phenomena is, since it's, in maybe it's not very easily identifiable as one color, and so that's why perhaps you can't have, red clouds or white clouds or blue clouds, and you
Yeah,
can't posit them as primary colors.
no, it's pretty identifiable. I mean, you look up at a cloud and you can definitely tell if it's white or black or red, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
people don't
Okay.
have much doubt
Yeah.
about that. Now, there is a reason why those eight are listed as the secondary colors. If you want that reason, which we could refer to a book recently, well, no, been a couple years ago that it was translated into English called "This Science and Philosophy and the Indian Buddhist Classics," Volume 1 on the material world, the physical world. I posted a link to it in the Slack forum just earlier today. So it's in the recommended reading. So that
Okay.
actually goes into quite a good amount of detail on why these divisions are the way they are, why these definition, what is the really the meaning of this definition of form, that which is capable of materiality. Again, this is the text where that translation comes in, but it's usually suitable as form. Um, I would just to tell you that if you don't have that book, it's basically the idea is that it's in order. A lot of things in Buddhist philosophy are posited the way they are in order to overcome specific mistaken views about things in general, all over the place. So whatever topic you're in. So here, when we're just talking about basic, structure of physical phenomena, physical objects, what's the mistaken view that could come into play here? This is according in Asanga is quoted in that book I mentioned, is just that some people might see a cloud and recognize that, well, when you go closer to it, if you go up in the airplane and you start going through a cloud, or if the cloud comes down to earth and it becomes fog, its form disappears. You can't any longer see it as a cloud. Likewise with smoke, dust, and mist, right? It's like you have a cloud of dust, but you actually walk into it and it's no longer like an outlined form of dust. Now you're just like in this like dark kind of foggy, it doesn't keep its form the closer you get to it. So there might be the mistaken view, oh, that means it's not form. That means it has no color. That means it isn't form. So it's specifically set out as being as one of the categories of secondary color, so that eliminates the wrong view that those things have no form, or are not form. And then with the
So
other four,
therefore, a red cloud can be red. I mean, sorry, I
the
just
gist of it is the color of a red cloud is red. Yes, that's that's the gist of it.
okay, okay. Thank you. I'm
Yes.
sorry for my limited understanding. Thank you very
No,
much.
yes, I'm sorry for, yeah, it's not
Yeah.
just answering the question straight out, but that's good. Okay, no more questions. Cool. Okay, see you everybody later.